right, good morning, Chairperson, members Garrett and Bollendroff, staff and guests. The lobbies are open and the recording has begun.
Thank you, Justin. Good morning, everybody. We'll convene the Liquor and Cannabis Board Caucus meeting for March 28th, 2023. We're going to move a few things around on the agenda to accommodate some schedules. So we're going to first start with discussion about pending emergency rule proposal on the social equity program. And Kathy, you're going to start us off on this, yes?
Yes,
And licensing is here as well.
Yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
All right, so good morning to you and to Board Member Garrett and Vollendroff as well. And thanks Becky and Caitlin for joining today. I'm glad you're here. So as you know, we opened the 30-day window to accept applications for our social equity program on March 1st. And the application window was scheduled to close on March 30th. So that's just a couple days away from now. And as part of the social equity application process, some applicants seek to form a new business entity by applying for certification as a limited liability company or similar business structure through the Washington State Secretary of State office. So on about March 20th, so that was last Monday, we learned that there'd been an unforeseeable and unexpected delay in processing those applications. And there was a backlog that had accumulated of over, it was over about 10 days. And LCB found that that delay in processing was likely to and is likely to impact the timely completion of all necessary requirements for some of the social equity program applicants who are seeking to form a new business entity. So for that reason, we find that an immediate temporary extension of the application window from its current 30 days to 58 days is necessary to provide equitable opportunity for potential participants to complete the social equity application process. I know there might be a question about why aren't we doing 60 days? The 58-day period aligns with the operational practices of the Department of Revenue's business licensing services, and they are the entity who accepts and processes LCB licensing application. So as an operational matter, BLS or Business Licensing Services is required to close the application window on a Thursday. Excuse me, meaning that the application window will close on April 27th of this year at 5 p.m. So that's what Daniel will be bringing to you tomorrow. I will not be able to attend the board meeting, so he'll be presenting on my behalf. I want to hand it over to Becky and Caitlin if there's anything I've forgotten to mention there, and then to the board for questions.
So I don't know if it's anything that you forgot to mention, but I do want to mention that the Secretary of State, that when we found out about the backlog, we did reach out to them, and they've been diligent about trying to catch up, and they've worked really hard. They've worked in partnership with LCB. That again, this seemed to be the best way to allow for those folks that were in the middle of changing it into an LLC to be able to make that happen. That there's not just an online form, there's actually, the ability for people to send in a paper form as well. And so as we get questions about why not just allow the folks that are in the middle of applying to apply, it's more complicated than that at Secretary of State. And we wanted just to make sure that everyone who wants to participate in this program has the ability to participate, or I should say the opportunity.
Correct. Okay. Questions from the board?
Becky, and this is something that all of the mentors and folks that's working with the licensees and potential licensees will be aware of and able to work with folks on letting them know about this.
Yeah. So two things is I want to mention: the mentors don't work for LCB. The mentors work for the Department of Commerce.
Right.
That we have reached out to the Department of Commerce and informed them of this extension, and then they're the ones that communicate directly with their mentors.
Okay. But we are working with Commerce on this. They are aware.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, they are.
And Becky, just for reminding myself, licensees or applications are not scored based on when they come in. It doesn't really matter, because one thing I just want to make sure and be cognizant of, if I were an applicant and I had submitted mine already, I would be sitting there going, well, wait a minute, wasn't there a timeline? And what about those of us who got them in on time? But that really doesn't matter in this particular case, because essentially what we're trying to do is make sure, as you said, that we have equitable opportunity. And this is really about making sure that we are true to our nature on that. So just to clarify, it doesn't really matter the timing in which you got your application in.
Yep, you are correct, Jim. It doesn't matter the timing in which you got your application in. We had initially sent out a letter to those folks that had applied early on, but we sent out a follow-up letter as well, letting them know that they'll hear from our third-party vendor Ponder in May, and so not to expect that they'll be hearing from them this month in April.
Great, thank you.
When Becky said, some people would ask, why couldn't we just figure out who would put it in? That I was one of those people. So, I asked that question is, people put in their application before the deadline. Can we just find them? And we can't. And you can't reopen the application period. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Caitlin or Becky. We can't just extend the deadline for those who have paperwork pending at the Secretary of State's office. It just doesn't work that way, right? We have to say it's open, right?
That's correct.
And, as a reminder to everybody, includes, so we mentioned 3 different state agencies here, LCB, Secretary of State, Department of Revenue. And, so it can be confusing with people. Well, I put in my application here. Well, yeah, but it really is all these pieces need to come together. And if any one of those had a pinch point like this, it's just not fair to the people who are sitting in that queue, unknown to anybody that it was just sitting there. So there really is not a better solution to this than extending it for the whatever it is, 28 days more, and clearing out all those queues. And I think it's too bad on a lot of, we're all in a hurry. Would love to see this done. But we can't kick somebody out of this competition for a reason beyond their control. This is not to help people who didn't get their application in on time. It's to help people whose application was stuck in a traffic jam. And we don't want to punish those people. So that's, how I've come to look at it. And it does really sound like the Secretary of State's office has done a great job helping debug this, troubleshoot, and find, applications that are sitting there. So they're working. It's not that we're now going to sit and wait for this extension to come either. So that's where we're at, and we'll have this before us for an official vote tomorrow. Okay. Any other questions or comments about this? No. Okay. Great. Thank you both.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Good luck. Okay, we're going to bounce back to the top of the agenda now and hear from Mark Webster, our legislative director, on a session update. Morning, Mark.
Good morning, Chair Postman and members Garrett and Vollendroff. As Chair Postman mentioned, I am Mark Webster. I'm going to start by reviewing the budget proposals that we've seen, kind of a change to how we normally start, kind of a nod to my budget nerd roots. But we now do have proposals from both the House and the Senate. The House came out yesterday. You'll get plenty more detail from Rachel and the finance team, but just from a very quick read, the good news here is that the SMP project funding was included in both proposals. Each proposal includes funding for the bills that both chambers passed that impact our agency. So there's not a lot of real concern from that early read, but obviously more to come from the finance team. There are some concerns that we've heard from the Department of Agriculture regarding the funding for their testing lab, but we're going to need to learn more about that. Just a concern that I've heard, but we need to dig into that a little bit more. Our first agency request bill to be scheduled in the House Appropriations Committee is the Social Equity Bill, which has been scheduled for Thursday, the 30th. in House of Probes. And I believe Board Member Garrett will be testifying remotely, as she did in the equivalent committee in the Senate. There are 15 bills on the hearing calendar that day and another 4 on exec. So we do anticipate having very little time to speak to it, but it's an important thing to do. The following day, the 31st, the same committee will be hearing the THC bill, Senate Bill 5367. Again, we're not going to have long to speak. I think there's 12 on that day, 12 bills, but I'm confident we can try to set it up for success. And I do think both are in a good spot. Kind of like we did in the Senate, I think this is a great time to reach out to members that you know in the House, especially leadership or especially appropriations members. And I think our message is really a simple one. The bills have been worked. We don't need changes now. Just pass them through. It's less work for them. We don't need amendments. We don't need any Hail Mary fixes. Pass them along, you know. The subpoena bill, the third one, did finally move out of House regulated substances and gaming yesterday. Albeit with a very large amendment, something of a joint proposal from both parties. It has more explicit process requirements around notification for those who are served a subpoena, training for enforcement staff, and also tasks the LCB with ensuring it's used equitably and doesn't result in disproportionate impact. So we're going to need to dive into that, and we're going to be working with Chandra's team to really get a sense of what this means and what we want to do. And then we'll look to see when that's referred to rules. That one probably won't be going to appropriations. And on the board appointments, Chair Postman's nomination was added to the confirmation calendar on Friday. The Rules Committee could move the other 2. They have a very brief meeting this afternoon to move those to the floor calendar. So good to see those moving along, and we'll look to see that your nominations follow board members Bollendroff and Garrett. In other news, the limited law enforcement bill 1132 that we've been talking about, that's another big priority for enforcement, passed the Senate Law and Justice Committee last week. It's been referred to Ways and Means. I haven't seen it pop up on the schedule. We'll see if it's heard this Saturday, one of the placeholder hearings that both the House and the Senate have set up as they try to pass bills before the fiscal cutoff early in April. And again, the policy committee is tomorrow, but we're in a good spot. We don't have anything left in policy committee, so it's not something that we're going to need to sweat. For some of the other bills that we've talked a lot about, the arrest protection for medical patients, that was House Bill 1563, that passed the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee yesterday. A reworked version, pretty substantial amendments on the Cannabis Commission bill that passed out of House Regulated Substances and Gaming on a party line vote. It was a tight vote. And then finally, the House Committee will be taking up the Cannabis Advertising Regulation Bill 5363 today. Assume it'll pass, but we'll wait to see that at the 4 o'clock meeting of that committee.
Mark,
that's all I've got.
I'm sure. What's the gist of the change in the commission?
There's a lot more focus on social equity. And I know they were looking at increasing the percentage of the affected producer processors to vote to create one. And then they're also looking at exempting some of the new social equity producer processors. And, you know, there's 100 processors in our bill, just exempting them from having to pay early on. Just, you know, they're kind of coming on right as that's moving in. So wanting to make sure that they're addressed, or that their interests are taken up by the commission.
Thanks. Okay, any questions for Mark?
Nope, I
Okay.
have none. Thank you, Mark.
Get close, Mark.
Thank you.
Hang in there. Okay, we will go back now for the rest of our rules updates and board meeting prep, and turn it back over to you, Kathy.
Great, thanks again, Chair Postman, and good morning again, Board Member Garrett and Bollendroff. Going to do a little bit different arrangement than what's on the board agenda right now, but wanted to start off with Jeff talking to you about what he'll be presenting concerning the CR1 that he's bringing forward on private club memberships. And then I'll join Cassidy and Daniel when they speak to you about the rule petition responses that they'll be discussing with you tomorrow. Just because I want to do a little bit of an introduction on the way that form is a little bit different now and the kind of options that we're bringing to the board for consideration rather than just one recommendation. So Jeff, I'll hand it over to you for to talk to the board about what you'll be presenting tomorrow. Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Kathy, and good morning, Chair Postman and Member Garrett and Member Vollendroff. At tomorrow's board meeting, I will present a CR 101 pre-proposal package to consider revising WAC 31440 040 subsection 6 to permit private clubs licensed under RCW 6624 450 or 6624 452 to add additional membership drives and or to host consecutive membership drives. This possible rulemaking would also consider amendment, repeal, or the creation of new rule sections in Title 314 WAC to align potential revisions to WAC 31440 040. For a brief background, the board accepted a rulemaking petition on this issue on September 14th, 2022, which asked the agency to consider updates to this WAC section that would allow private clubs to add one additional membership drive per calendar quarter where club liquor may be given or sold as part of the membership drive activities, and that would equal up to a total of 8 per year. And it would also allow them to host a consecutive membership drive during 1 quarter per calendar year. The petition stated that the requested rule change would allow private club organizations, quote, to be able to reach out to the community more and showcase the good works we do within our community, the state of Washington, and across the nation, unquote. So if approved tomorrow for filing with the Office of the Code Revisor, notice will be published in the Washington State Register on April 19th, 2023. And under this timeline, the informal comment period for the CR 101 will end on April 14th, 2023. And we will tentatively expect that we will bring forward a CR 102 package with proposed rule language for your approval on May 24th, 2023. This would allow for the public hearing on proposed rules to be held on July 5th, 2023, and for consideration of the CR 103 permanent rule package on July 19th, 2023, which would give an effective date of August 19th, 2023 to any rules that take effect. So that concludes my presentation on tomorrow's CR 101 package, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I don't see any questions. Great, thanks, Jeff. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
All right, inviting Cassidy and Daniel to come on camera. And just for some introduction here, and I know I already mentioned this, but previously when we've provided the board with rule petition responses, and I'd say those have evolved over the last couple of years to include a lot more information like specific divisional impact, or I should say a reference to specific divisional impact on the a potential rule change. And then also interagency impacts. We now do a DEIB and social equity mini analysis with respect to what that rule might or rule change might mean in terms of those two elements that we think about. And in the past, we've always provided just one recommendation for the board to consider. We're moving into a different model that provides the board with up to 3 options about how they can respond to the petition. So one is accept the petition, deny the petition, but think about an alternative. And then the third is accept the petition and move into rulemaking. And so under each of those options, we take a look at the risks and benefits of each option. So Cassidy and Daniel will be presenting to you on the petitions that responses that they'll be bringing to you tomorrow. And then the board can, we're just encouraging as much questions that you ask as many questions as you'd like today. We're really looking forward to dialogue on that. The other thing that will be different about tomorrow's presentation is that Cassidy and Daniel are going to co-present on their petitions to support each other if needed, and help to answer questions, because they worked very closely together on these two petition responses. These are pretty much the first time that they've done this, and thought that would be a great idea to co-present, and I agree. So I'll stay on camera with you while you present, but whoever wants to go first, please do.
I can start. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Postman, members Garrett, Vollendroff, and members of the public. This morning, I'll be previewing the petition for rulemaking that I'll be presenting at tomorrow's board meeting. And as Kathy mentioned, I will not be making a specific recommendation, but rather presenting the options as I see it. The agency received a petition for rulemaking from John Kingsbury on January 31st, 2023, regarding medical cannabis endorsements for retail establishments. These regulations are primarily found in Washington Administrative Code 314-55080. And I'll go over in more detail the requirements tomorrow, but there's a specific section of the regulation that states that failure to comply with these requirements can result in surrender or revocation of the endorsement. For background, the petitioner has been in frequent contact with agency staff over the past several months regarding his concerns on medical cannabis endorsement holders, and in response to agency outreach, over 50 retailers since October have voluntarily surrendered their endorsement. While the agency has a list of what is now approximately 235 medical cannabis endorsement holders, and this list is updated weekly, some of the requirements mean that there is an unavoidable lag time between when a retailer no longer qualifies for the endorsement and when the agency would be notified of such noncompliance. Again, like I said, I'll go into more detail tomorrow regarding these three options, but essentially, the first one I see is that you can decline the petition and leave the regulation as is, in part because the specific request of the petitioner is to amend the regulation to create specific authority to terminate the endorsement for failure to comply with the requirements, and that authority is already in the regulation. Second is that you can decline the petition, leaving the rule as is, but send out some sort of public-facing message to licensees and to the public, reminding them of the requirements for holding a medical cannabis endorsement and providing additional information on how to surrender or renew the endorsement, as well as if they've left compliance, how to go about returning to compliance if they no longer meet the requirements. And then the last option is, of course, to accept the petition, in which case the rulemaking process, as is traditional, will proceed. And I think you are all familiar with what that would mean, because several petitions for rulemaking have recently been accepted. And then just like with Jeff's project that he just presented, it would lead to a 101 in the traditional rulemaking process. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
I just have one for today, and sort of a process question in general. So if we have a rule petition and it's to, as in this case, asking for a change in a specific rule, and then we say, well, we actually already have that authority in that rule. Can we accept the petition and look at a different rule related to the same issue? Or are we bound by the petition?
Can I add to that question? Because I had a similar question before you answer. Because I was wondering, would that be alternative two? So we decline it, but we say we're going to do X, Y, and Z, or have some combination response.
Be like a 2A, but yeah.
Sure. So I saw that Kathy unmuted, but I'll take a stab at answering, and then if she has anything to add or if I get something wrong. So we can certainly decline that's another option. We could decline the petition, but however, say that the petition has brought up questions and the board decide to open up the rulemaking on its own. There's no, there are CR 101s and rulemaking projects that start because of other reasons other than petitions, such as legislation. It just doesn't need to have something like that.
Right.
And if the board wanted more flexibility to look at the rule and didn't want to feel like the scope was so narrow, I suppose that would be an option. But in theory, I mean, the rule team can present an 101 for changing any rule, really. It just so happens that because of statutes and because of rules in our process, when someone submits a petition, we have to respond to it and address it. But there's no reason why the rule team couldn't present a 101 for approval that has a slightly different scope than is initially intended by the petition.
But we would have to decline the petition asking for the other piece of that. Kathy, no?
No, not necessarily. And Daniel, you're right. So, and that is kind of typically when we go into rulemaking, and if we're thinking about a specific petition, I'll use cloud storage as a great example, right? Where we accepted the petition that was really more closely related to whether or not cloud storage should be allowed if it isn't sort of already allowed, right, in rule with respect to cannabis licensees. And the board said, you know what, we want to take a look and see if this might apply to the other areas that we regulate. So there we expanded the petition. There are some petition requests that we get that are very specific where they say, we want you to change this one rule with this language. And I think in that instance, it really does restrict us on what we can do in the rulemaking. But it really is kind of up to the board on this one. I think you'll have to remind me, Daniel, I haven't looked at the petition specifically, but if it's specific language for a specific section of rule, I think we're more limited on what we can do. Yeah.
Sure. So, and I'll just follow up with that. So while I submitted with the materials the initial petition, Mr. Kingsbury has actually followed up with me since then and submitted some additional information and indicated that he wouldn't be opposed to amending sort of the scope of the petition. And at which point I responded to him and I was like, well, I've kind of already started drafting the response to the petition. So that ball has already started rolling. But in this particular case, I think the petitioner has indicated that his sort of openness to the board looking at the rule more broadly. And I didn't initially indicate that in my response just because like I said, my initial response was limited in scope to the issue of the authority for termination.
So one thing that would help me tomorrow, and it would be not, maybe it's a less question for licensing or someone else, but if we were looking for something other, I mean, there's no reason to accept the petition to look specifically at that authority if we already have that authority. But if there is a sense of the board that we want to do more on the medical side, and I know we only have a day here, but if there's any options that people could present to us tomorrow of what that could look like, that would be helpful. Of course, we don't have to do it tomorrow. We could decline the petition tomorrow and follow up in a week or whatever, but it would be nice to know whatever we could know, for me at least tomorrow, before we have to act on this, some ideas of what that could look like. So, okay. Other questions? Yes, Kathy is waiting.
I just wanted to add, one of the options, and I think Daniel did a really good job of presenting this in the response, but talking about alternative ways to address these concerns. And I think Daniel spoke to one of them, but we could also do like, and I'm just thinking out loud, licensing could potentially send letters to folks with a medical endorsement to say, just checking in and with a friendly reminder, this is what you need to have. And licensing may have already done this, but this is what you need to maintain in order to keep your endorsement current. And if
Right.
you're not doing that, happy to work with you. Or if you don't want to keep doing that, let's talk about surrendering your endorsement to the agency. So
Yeah.
there's,
And
yeah.
that's one of the questions. I think licensing has done that. And I know that policy sent a letter last fall, I think it was. And so we've sort of done that initial. And so I guess the question is, okay, then what? What could it look like? And I know licensing had some ideas of what they would like to see. And I don't know whether that requires rulemaking or not. And I can go back and look at the note I got on that. But that would be my question is, are there things that would be helpful to licensing in this effort? But yeah, anyhow, that was my thoughts. Okay.
So basically what we're saying is, I think it's more like, the petition itself is asking for something we already do. And that's already, we can do. And the concern of bringing it up was, and I'm talking out loud, thinking out loud, is because there are some folks that hold that doesn't have, they're not in compliance, having the medical. And what we're saying is we can deny it, but at the same time, send out a letter to all of the ones that have that to reinforce what's necessary to be in compliance, making sure you're in compliance and making sure you want to stay in compliance. And if not, to notify us or let us help you get in compliance. And I know we've done it in the past, but it's something that we can probably periodically keep doing, because people's circumstances changes. So somebody might be in compliance today, but not 6 months from now, or decide, hey, I don't want to do this any longer, but never notify us.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's right. Jim?
Well, maybe this is a question for tomorrow, but what are the penalties, if you will, for not being in compliance, or what are the consequences of not being in compliance? And is that something we need to discuss at some point?
There aren't any. It's an endorsement. It's entirely voluntary. So there's no sort of a enforcement and education action that would come from someone not using or complying with an endorsement.
Except for revocation.
Except for revocation, yes,
Just
you're
take
right.
that
Yeah.
endorsement
Yeah.
from it.
Right.
But and that's why I
So-
think that, go ahead, Ollie.
Why would a person, because right now, the concern could be, we are listing those people somewhere for medical patients to see that they have endorsements.
Right.
And they can go into that location and discover, we just made a trip for nothing. They don't have this here.
Right.
But what is the benefit of those that have the endorsement?
The benefit is supposed to be a couple things, but one is that you have somebody there, a consultant who's trained
Right.
to know something about this. So if you go into a place, it's not just that they don't have certain product on the shelf,
Right.
but they don't have somebody there who is sort of the holder of this endorsement, if you will, on behalf of the licensee to say, oh, you've got this ailment. Let me tell you what I
Right.
know.
But there's no gain. There's no, if you have this endorsement, you get a decrease in this or da da da.
You could, no, because and it should mean you have a what is it, a representative sample of DOH compliant product
Okay,
there,
okay.
which is not really defined either, and hard to enforce. You can give cannabis to registered patients, I think, regardless of whether you have this endorsement or not. That's on the consumer if the consumer has a recommendation or whatever we call it. But yeah, I mean, and that's, I guess, the answer to the bigger question of why doesn't this have more impact or something is, if you look up somewhere and they say this store has this and you go there and they don't, they still have a lot of cannabis on the shelves. They may have people there to tell you things. It's not like oh, we don't carry that. And so it just may not have enough benefit to it. That's one of the things I think we have to look at is what's our goal here is not just to make sure that they're fulfilling the terms of this endorsement, but that the endorsement is there because we want to serve medical patients. So is that happening? Are they able to get their product elsewhere maybe, and it's just not a big deal to them? Maybe they're going to the illicit market. That would be a big deal to us. So I always think we got to look at the real why of it, not just how do we enforce the mechanism we have, but why are we doing it? And is it achieving that goal? And it's hard to know because, you know, we had somebody help us do some research on what folks are saying. And it's frankly just hard to know what's really going out there. People don't feel comfortable telling us. We know there's some reluctance for people to sign up on the database. They don't want to be in, you know, somebody's state record. So anyhow, it's more complicated than just this question of who has authority to revoke.
Right, it's a matter of
endorsements.
getting the right, finding the right. And I
Yeah.
remember, so I guess there used to be where medical patients, we would hear from them a lot. They would come to the board meetings complaining that they weren't able to find medical compliance products and on it and things. So are we hearing from others then who put the petition in that they're going into places that have the endorsement and they don't have the product and things? Or are we hearing from others?
Not a lot.
Okay.
Well,
if
you know,
But-
I would, the one thing I would say is I have heard in public meetings or elsewhere that there is dissatisfaction with the medicinal marijuana program. And so, but I don't think we've seen people coming to board meetings recently. I just don't want to make us think that there's not any concern out there because I think there is concern.
No, I think
Well,
there
there's
is
concern about the product. I'm saying, are we hearing from folks saying they were going into places that had the medical endorsement and it's not
Certainly
there?
the petitioner is telling us that, you know, and he is going out to those stores. Kathy?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, this was one of the things that we brought up when we did the first deliberative dialogue. So this was like, gosh, I want to say this was 2021, January of 2021. And we had a consumer panel where we posed that question. Do you have access to medically compliant product? How, when, why, where, all those things. And I will say that the consumers that we spoke with who are on our panel were real mixed on that. Mr. Kingsbury indicated that he could not find those products, but there was two other people on the panel who said they had easy access to those products and didn't have any problem finding those products. So I think it's something that the agency could look more closely at in the future. Because I think that to your point, Chair Postman, the representative assortment, the way that's addressed in rule right now, it doesn't say that retailers have to have so many products on the shelves. I think that might be sort of an unreasonable regulation, but how do we make sure that there's enough out there? So yeah, definitely something that we can look into. I'll stop. Thank you.
And I apologize. So I'm still learning some of this stuff. And so I have a couple questions and I don't know whether it will be discussed tomorrow or whether I should set up a separate meeting with Daniel or Cassidy to get these answered. But I have questions about, like, how does somebody know that a place has this endorsement? Like, is there something on the door? Do they have to look it up? Do they have to call? How do they find that out? I have questions about, like, is this just something that somebody gets regardless, or do they have to show qualifications of somebody at the retailer site that demonstrate that they have qualifications to have these kind of conversations? So should I set up a meeting separate from that, or will those be things that are discussed tomorrow?
So sorry, go ahead, Member Garrett.
So Jim, you said this twice, so I just want to ask a question about tomorrow in the board meeting. Because you several times have mentioned, is it going to be discussed tomorrow or brought up tomorrow? So are we going into something different tomorrow as to more information being brought to us or something that
Well-
we're not talking about today at Caucus?
No, I mean, we certainly can't talk about anything today. It's just tomorrow is final action by the board. And so it's
Right.
just another opportunity for staff to present information.
Okay.
And normally,
Okay,
I mean, I think it's just sort of become practice that the caucus briefing is a little briefer sometimes than the
Right.
meeting
That's what I
one,
was
since-
referring to.
Since we're actually
Okay.
taking the vote at the board meeting, we
okay,
don't need to necessarily hear it all twice. But so I think that's.
And Daniel, you mentioned the specific WACs, and I can go look those up, in my own time, but there's just
the
a lot
short
of
answer-
questions are coming from me.
We can get those answers, and it is there is a list on the website of where you can go this, and that's what the petitioners looked at and shown up at those places. And they are supposed to list a qualified, I forget, but do they call them a bud tender in there or consultant?
It's a consultant, yeah.
a
The other
consultant.
thing, if I may, just really quickly, Member Vollendorf, and I'll send you some links. There's a lot of information on the DOH website about the consultant program and what the requirements are to meet the endorsement. So there's information on both websites, and we can certainly get that to you.
Thank you.
And
Oh, of course.
one of the things that happens is that you can get this endorsement, let's say 3 years ago, and you have a consultant there, and then that consultant leaves.
Right.
The licensee doesn't necessarily go, oh, I'm no longer in compliance of the medical thing. I better alert the LCB. And it's not that they're trying to, do something wrong there. It's just not top of mind and not necessarily making that connection. They may, and probably my guess is most, have one person who is that consultant. If that consultant takes another job, they're no longer eligible for that endorsement. Now, we've told them that, but I think one of the big questions here is, and some of it is just priority setting for us is the board, is, how high of a priority is that? Do we want to go and take that list and check like the petitioner is and saying, hey, where's your consultant? You said you have this guy here. Is he here? If not, boom, we're going to take it from you. Or do we, wait for the kind of voluntary, turning in of self-revocation, if you will, of these things. And again, to me, the question is, how do we improve access to the product and to serve the consumer? I don't know what the answer is in terms of whether is the best use of our licensing and enforcement time checking on this, or is there something else the LCB could do, maybe even outside the realm of the endorsement, to improve the world for medical consumers, right?
Yeah, I really like how you just phrased that, Dave, because for me, that's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to make sure that consumers of medicinal product have access to it, they have good information, etc. And so that's a great way to phrase that. And
just as a reminder to all of us, it's in the LCB strategic plan to advance this. So, we have an obligation to do that. I feel like we have a lot going on internally toward that end. I know it's not fast enough for some, but we can make a difference in how we do that. Rick, you have your hand up.
Good morning. I think Jim, Board Member Bollendorf, that's an issue that the board has been prioritized it 5 years ago as one of 3 issues that we needed to look at in regulating the cannabis marketplace. And we had continual complaints from the beginning to date that there is product that is not available, that medical patients had available to them before the merger occurred. Mm-hmm. And so just so you're aware, and the other board members, and I know David knows that Justin has done a lot of work in this area the last few years, met with the medical cannabis community, folks that John Kingsbury had suggested, has written several documents and kind of what I'd call white papers that kind of delve deeper. But I think to David's point, we're focused in one area here because that's the issue before us with respect to the petition. But there's a much broader issue there, as David said, that we have struggled with to address. And that's probably why the petitioner continues to try to address this issue that's focused toward the endorsement and the medical cannabis consultants that DOH has to approve that give these recommendations of product. But to your point, Jim, it would be good for you to sit with, I think because you're new and you're looking for the orientation of what have we been doing the last few years around this and other staff, and that could get you as close to up speed. But I can tell you, Jim, we've not found a way to address it. We've even had discussions of late about, and I don't know if it could work, but creating like medical clinics for cannabis that are separated from the commercial aspect of it. And a couple of other states have done it, but that will take time to build that and what that should look like. But I thought I would just share with you that this has been a priority, as David said, not only of the strategic plan of the board, but the priorities that the board spelled out when Ollie was with us, I think 5 years ago.
Great, thank you.
I think what we need, we should have that a discussion like that here at a caucus. I think we all want to be a part of that and talk about it and have a real conversation, not just about what we've been doing, but what can we do now? What are those next steps? And I think that really relates to what we do tomorrow in terms of how to handle the petition. Because I don't want to just, deny a petition and say we'll send a letter because I think we've done that, or we'll do better because we've said that. But what can we really look at? And I think if we want to do that tomorrow and we end up wanting to decline the petition, we should be clear about what our expectation is for exploring what we do want to do. And I think that has to include some kind of work session for us all on that. That'd be my suggestion, but we can deal with that tomorrow. Okay. Any other questions on this simple rules petition? Daniel, anything more to add on this? Okay.
No,
Yes.
not at this time. I mean, yeah, probably, but I think I'll save it for tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah, we all get another bite at the apple tomorrow. So thank you for that. Good conversation. Cassidy.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair Postman, and good morning, board members Garrett and Vollendroff. Tomorrow, I will also be presenting a petition that the board received on February 6th from Micah Sherman, requesting that the agency consider amending WAC 314-55115 subsection 1 to allow checks be mailed and postmarked within 3 days of delivery, including the date of delivery. Now that that section WAC 314-55115 provides the methods of payment that may be used as payment for cannabis in transactions between licensees. So under the current rules, payment is required prior to or at the time of delivery, and only cash or another form of payment that the board recognizes as cash, which includes checks, may be used as payment for cannabis transactions between licensees. Now, with regards to checks, this presumably, because payment is required prior to or at the time of delivery, this would presumably mean that the check has been received by the seller prior to or at the time of delivery. However, this is not specifically addressed in the rules. For some other methods of payment that the board recognizes as cash for purposes of the rule, like credit debit charges, electronic funds transfers, and transactions using a money transmitter, payment may be initiated up to 1 day following the delivery. And so WAC 314-55115, the subsection 6 further provides that if a transaction is reported as having not sufficient funds, then the purchaser, must pay the full amount of the transaction to the seller by 3 p.m. on the first business day following the delivery. Until the NSF transaction is paid, the cannabis licensee who received the transaction may not receive the NSF transaction, may not deliver cannabis to the purchaser, and it is the responsibility of the purchaser not to receive any additional cannabis from another cannabis licensee. By rule, any transaction reported as having not sufficient funds is considered to be an extension of credit. If a prepaid account is used and a cash deposit is overextended, it is also considered to be an extension of credit. And if a cannabis licensee makes any attempt to delay a payment on a money transmitter for any period of time, it is considered an attempt to purchase products on credit. Extensions of credit are generally prohibited out of concerns for undue influence. I will provide additional context about this at tomorrow's meeting unless people have questions and would like me to go into it today. But briefly, it really has to do with LCB's initial regulatory framework and to regulate cannabis like alcohol. And so tomorrow I'll be presenting policy options for the board to consider in response to this petition, as Kathy mentioned, and risk and benefits with either. Just briefly, if the board were to move forward with denying the petition, then the issues cited by Micah Sherman in his petition would not be mitigated. If the board chose to accept the petition and agreed to amend WAC 314115 subsection 1 to allow checks for purchasing cannabis be mailed and postmarked within that 3-day window, that it's possible. A giant risk here is that if the board approves the petition, then the agency would enter into the rule inquiry. No rule change could occur, or change could occur that may not necessarily address the stakeholder feedback. A benefit of accepting the rule petition and moving forward with amending that subsection would be that cannabis businesses have additional flexibility to conduct business in a manner that is consistent with common and usual business practices, which supports the agency's overarching social equity goal. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
I do. And I asked you about this the other day, yesterday, I guess. But I just really want to be clear on this. So today, if you make a delivery of cannabis, your customer can pay you with a check that day, right? That's an accepted form. But what they can't do is say the check is in the mail, right?
Right. Yes.
And it would be allowed if we followed this, this suggestion from Mr. Sherman. Is what you could do is say, okay, you owe us $10,000 and it's due in 3 days, and we can send that check off the next day, right? That's kind of in the simple terms, the change we're talking about.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So then let's move from cannabis to alcohol. If I come with 2 cases or whatever, I don't know how much people buy. Anyhow, let's say, 10 cases of booze. Can the liquor store say to me, I'll put the check in the mail, it'll show up in 2 days?
That's a very good question. Kathy or Daniel, do you have information about that?
I believe it's 5 days, Chair's Postman.
So you can.
I'll take a look. Let me double check that, but I believe
Okay.
it's 5 days. Yeah.
Kathy, I think you're right about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me double check while I'm going to go off camera just for a second.
Okay, great. Yeah, that to me is important. We've talked about trying to have some more similarities between our alcohol and cannabis. If we're not concerned that this sort of short-term debt, if you will, is problematic on the alcohol side, why is it on the cannabis side? That's what my main question on this issue has been all along, is that, and again, to make sure I am understanding this right, the issue is that in that time frame between, let's say I'm running the store, I get product delivered, but I don't pay for 3 days. For those 3 days, the processor who sold me that stuff has a financial interest in my operation because I have a debt to them. Is that, again, simplistic, but is that the issue?
That is I think that is in general, yes, what the background or history is with regards to that.
Sort of why we don't let people run a tab, essentially, for this.
Right, that's good to hear, because that was my question. So that's helpful to understand that.
I don't.
Yeah. Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead. So you go ahead,
I was
Kathy.
gonna say, understand it, or is that correct to assume?
I mean, I think
So-
that's the root of it, right? This is how it started.
It's
back
the
in
root
alcohol
of it,
days.
but
That's right.
is that correct and right?
Right. And again, same question that we just had with the other petition to me is, okay, here's what the rule is, but what are we getting at? What is the
Right.
Yeah, why is it in
ill
place
we're
in the first?
trying to prevent or cure?
Yeah,
If it's sort of, we need to keep our tiers separate because we don't want any, financial connection between a processor and a retail person is waiting for a check in the mail, a financial interest. Now, maybe it
Right.
is legally. I don't know. Kathy, did you find something there?
I did. I just wanted to say that my recollection was correct, but it has to do with electronic fund transfers. So it's specific to EFTs. And it says that the transfer has to be initiated by the retailer or industry member no later than the first business day. And I believe it needs to be, let's see, and in no event later than 5 business days following a delivery.
Wait, it said it needs to be initiated the next business day?
Right, but in no event, no later than 5, so there's a little bit of a.
So it's really
squish room
5.
there. Yeah, it's really
Right,
5.
it's really
If
fun.
you don't mind, I want to step in there and follow
Yeah.
up on that. So the actually the cannabis rules say the same exact thing. That electronic funds transfers, transaction using money transmitters, and credit debit payments, you can initiate that payment one day after you've gotten the products delivered to you. Now, besides credit and debit charges, there is that 5-day window that payment can be received and the transaction, completed, bill paid sort of thing. For credit debit cards and cash and checks and prepaid accounts, the payment is due that day. Credit debit cards have this really weird carve out where they are allowed to initiate the payment the day after the delivery. All those other methods of payment are required to pay prior to or at the time of delivery. So you can see that kind of the inconsistencies between payment methods.
Right.
mhm.
Inconsistency
remember-
between-
I
Go ahead.
remember in the past, there were things that was brought up to us, like somebody drove across the mountain to whatever to make a delivery. And the business owner wasn't there to have signed the check or left the check or something. And they would have to go back without leaving the product
Mm.
and things.
Huh.
I haven't heard those things recently, but it
No.
was things like that that I used to hear about.
Interesting.
I think
Right.
there's, Cassie, when you mentioned inconsistency, there is within the cannabis business, inconsistency based on payment type, and then some inconsistency between cannabis and alcohol. Does cannabis have that next day, but no later than 5-day language, or does it just say must be on, it is the same language?
Same exact language, yes.
Huh.
Wow.
And if I could, sorry, I just raised my hand. I just want to add one thing. The difference with cannabis is that not everybody has access to the electronic payment services. That's another thing that's different between cannabis and alcohol, right? Because of the banking issues. So that's another challenge. And I think the parity that's kind of being suggested by this petition is kind of it's a challenge. And I see Rick has his hand up as well. Go ahead, Rick.
Well, I think you've kind of all talked about it. It's the original Tied House law, 3-tier system that was created that no retailer would ever be able to create terms of credit or from the distributor, that then there would be nothing owed, no credit. And then 10 years ago, through the electronic fund transfers that can take 1 to 2 days, the industry came forward to us on the alcohol side and said, you got to help us with this because we can't control how the banks move money, which is why you're seeing a carve out there, but not in the other areas that David just spoke of or someone did. So it is what the original Tied House law was. The history is many of the states have established 2, 3, and 5-day credit terms for alcohol over the years, just modernizing the systems. But it's been reluctant too. In many of the states like ours, it's not allowed.
What about Rick, elsewhere. Have you heard anything about whether recreational states allow for a 3 or 5 day?
You know, because all the other states are vertically integrated, that issue would not come up, David. We're one of the few that don't allow integration, which is that whole financial tie, which is how you get tied house and money's worth and the 3-tier system. In our system, where most of all the other states do not deal with this issue, because I can be all 3 or I can purchase from all and it's not an issue.
Right. So if you're holding a debt for a week, you're just,
Yeah,
it's just not the same. Okay, that makes sense.
And if
Okay.
I recall, Rick, we are just Washington and maybe 2 other states are not vertically integrated.
Yeah, I think New York
New
took
York
that
and
step when it legalized recently,
yes,
but most states have, because it was there, just like it was here.
right.
Before it went into adult use, medical was vertically integrated here, which creates a lot of the problems that we have, honestly, when we talk about the medical cannabis product being available or not, because we're separated in those tiers. The grower, the processor created these medically compliant products for the patients themselves, their own patients at that time. So there's a little bit of history here, but that whole inability to be vertically integrated can create problems. And that's why we always fall back on the 3-tier tied house law for alcohol, because when Allison Holcomb wrote the initiative, she mirrored the way we came out of prohibition for alcohol. The same restrictions with respect to financial interest between the tiers, tied house 3-tier. That's why you keep seeing the reference back to it.
Right, but it seems at this point, Rick, that alcohol, because of that change with the EFTs, that they've advanced more than cannabis. So maybe cannabis started with,
Yeah, I think that's
502
true.
to model it, but
Yes.
we've seen more evolution on the alcohol side than cannabis. We haven't allowed as much change there, maybe?
No, I think that's true, because you've been making changes, the board, year to year, to bring it along from where it was. Remember, it was very restrictive at first. So you're just taking less time rather than 80 years to get there in the alcohol industry. Honestly, you're moving it more quickly by allowing things like this.
Do you think that allowing time for 3 days for a check does eat at the tier system at all? Is that a threat?
Oh, I think you'd hear arguments of that, of course. But
Yeah.
frankly, the way that you can track things these days and our ability to know and having the ability for us to look at how they transpire these sales between the tiers, you know, Chairman, if you had a work session on that, you'd get competing messages with respect to that. But I just think, as we always do, we tend to slowly make changes over time, and this seems like one that we should consider.
Okay, thank you. That helps. All right, and consider it we will tomorrow. Other questions, Jim? Do you have something?
I have just one quick, Cassidy. It seems to me in your initial presentation, you said something about generally may not extend credit or something. Did I hear that correctly? And how does that impact this discussion, if at all? That generally comment?
Oh, sure. It's in regards to extension of credit are generally prohibited. I guess for this rule, it does actually say in certain sections that extensions of credit are unlawful. So for money transmitters, that's actually unlawful, whatever the rule says, and I can bring that up in a second. Sorry, can't remember off the top of my head, but because the way that the rules were translated over from the alcohol section of alcohol rules, there, if you look into WAC 314555018, it bridges that gap a little bit for you. So it talks about advancing I have this written down, I'm sorry, how advancing money's worth and money advances, that those are extensions of credit, and you cannot enter agreements to basically do those things. And those are undue influence. So if you didn't know the alcohol rules, you would not know to link those sections together.
Hmm.
Yes. And even so, I don't know that I would have come so much to that conclusion had I not gotten the background from everybody about the alcohol rules.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
Thank you.
as Rick said, that history just sort of runs through all of this stuff, and sometimes that's super helpful, and sometimes it just makes me scratch my head a little bit. I would say I generally understand this issue at this point, but one last question I thought of, and I don't know if this was in the memo, I don't recall. Does the petitioner explain why this is a problem for them? What's the harm to them for not having this?
Sure. Mr. Sherman just cited logistical issues. He did not go into anything specifically. He did tell Kathy, I believe, or Dr. Hoffman, that he was going to follow up and give some more information about the context of why he submitted the petition. We have not received anything, but I believe I believe that the logistical issues related to, you know, driving over a mountain pass or something and not being able to deliver it, that sounds very familiar. And so I think that that's probably on point. I know in other states that's been an issue. So.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
Kathy, anything there to add? No.
No, but thank you, Cassidy and Daniel, for some excellent presentations. I appreciate it.
Thank you
Thank you.
all.
Yeah, as do I. Thank you. That was interesting, and I look forward to having all those conversations again tomorrow. Okay. So one thing I would mention, Kathy, you know, I like having these options out there for us to discuss at Caucus. I think it's great, and it leads to, I think, this sort of conversation, more substantive conversation. I do think we should think about whether we want to separate by more than a day in the future this conversation and final board action, because there are questions that come up, and maybe it is, you know, we have this caucus and that the week before the board meeting, and then the board meeting follows, where we take that final action, just because we are starting a little more from a neutral place in this case. And if we have questions or ideas or even options that we want to develop over that week, maybe that makes sense. I don't know what the other board members think, but I think maybe a little period there would help us.
Well, what happened to, and are we changing from, because normally this stuff is brought to us in a one-on-one, and a lot of these questions and concerns that we personally have, they have time to get back to us with answers before it's even brought fully to caucus, and part of when they present to us, they kind of cover and to address the question that such and such board member had and such board member have, they bring that to us from the one-on-ones. Are we changing that?
Well, we're not changing that. I think a couple different, with petitions, the process is a little different because we have in front of us whether to accept before we see that. Right. And I think most everything should still be the way it always was, and you should have the opportunity to be briefed by staff prior to these meetings.
Right.
What I think the goal and the difference in my mind is that in the past, when we were briefed, the policy rules team would say, and here's our recommendation, decline it, and here's why we think that. What they're doing now is saying, here's all our analysis, and that gives you 3 options. And it's sort of putting it on us then to say, of those 3, here's what it is. So
I thought that's what to my knowledge, that's what I was getting in my one-on-ones.
No, they would give us.
And maybe because that's what I would keep pushing the conversation to get that in the one-on-ones. Yeah. I don't know. I thought I was getting that.
No, and I think for this particular round, these were Cassidy and Daniel's really first rule petitions, and we were running on some pretty tight turnaround times on this. But our practice has always been to meet with each board member individually to discuss, and I did that with you yesterday, Ollie.
Right.
And it was very brief. But I think to Chair Postman's point of perhaps having these more robust discussions, in the caucus the week before the board meeting, I would offer, I believe there's some merit in that. I think that might be helpful in addition to the one-on-ones that we have with each board member, and we're happy to do that.
But Kathy, do I have this right? That the only thing that's really changing is you're moving from giving us a recommendation to giving us options.
Options, correct.
And we'll do that both for petitions and other proposals that come before us?
Yes, unless you've asked us for a specific recommendation, and otherwise we'll provide options, but yeah, essentially that is the only change to the way we're approaching this, is to really give the board a really good idea of what all your options are, across the entire authorizing environment than just our recommendation.
I think it's a good move. You know, we rely on you and your staff so much. I think we always want to have the ability to ask for some sort of guidance or recommendation if we're trying to figure it out. I don't think we want to stop that part, because, and same goes for division heads and everybody else. We want to hear what people think. I think that that's a small change, but it allows a more transparent, robust conversation in front of the public about these issues before we vote. I think it does reflect the board's role in policy setting. So I think it was a good idea, and certainly no shortage of conversation today on it. So yeah, we should try it. But I would just always encourage all staff to be open with us about what they really think. You know, and if there is a recommendation or a concern or something we're not thinking of, that has to be part of that conversation too. Because if we're just given options and then people step back and go, hey, it's up to you, you pick, you know, it's a team and we need that team working together to come up with the best, I think, answers. And the more we do it out in public like this, the better it is, I think, for us as well as for the public. So thank you for that. All right, as
All
we
right, thank you.
thank you so much. Rick Garza, again, for any other agency updates you want to share today, Rick?
Well, I know we're over, Chair Postman, but I'll be very brief. I think it was a really good to see that our 3 agency request bills are moving forward. And then I just learned that, David, your appointment has moved forward also. So it's going to be good to see if we can get that done this year. I think I think you were good enough to share it, and also licensing director Becky Smith. But when we reached out to Steve Hobbs, the Secretary of State, his deputy reached out to me immediately to get a meeting together to work through the issue that they saw that we were having, and also brought staff in on the weekend to begin to process those applications for those who are interested in either forming an LLC or a corporation, which is the first piece of then applying to be a social equity applicant. And that's the discord there that you heard earlier about, you know, we're going to have to extend it for everybody. But I just want to reiterate that they have reached out quickly to help us. And then maybe thirdly, I know that there's been, I'm assuming because Justin is out this week for spring break with his family, we'll have a discussion next Tuesday about the research unit that we're considering.
I think that's going to have to be put off another week because
okay.
Ollie is not with us next week, and I think we should all be here for that.
Well, look forward to that discussion. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I see on the agenda. No. Any questions that you might have for me?
Any questions, Rick? No. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that takes us to board member and executive assistant reports. Dustin, anything to add?
Not for me. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Jim Raleigh?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, great. Me too. We will be back here at 10 o'clock tomorrow for the board meeting. We'll take action on those 2 rules petitions and talk about some other things as well, and the emergency rule on social equity. So big day tomorrow. And with that, we'll adjourn the board caucus meeting for March 28th. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.